This is All India Radio. In this special program, we now bring you an exclusive interview with the Chief Economic Advisor, Dr. V. Anantha Nageswaran. Interviewer is Arjun J. Chaudhary, AIR correspondent.
It is a special honor and privilege to have the newly appointed Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India, Shri Dr. V. Anantha Nageswaran, with us on this special program on All India Radio, where he will discuss in detail Dr. Nageswaran's contribution of a very revealing chapter to the compilation of a book of 21 other authors called Modi at 20 Dreams, Meet Reality, which is set for release shortly to the general public. The special chapter under discussion in this program covers a wide range of topics that have been on the forefront of government, business, interest groups and individuals under the current dispensation of governance. Dr. Nageswaran, once again, a warm welcome to the program on All India Radio.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Nageswaran, in the book and chapter concerning the governance of India, inevitably comparison has been drawn with China's ability to manufacture in the South Asia region as a hub for exports. What is the industry-specific leaps in manufacturing that have been achieved under Prime Minister Narendra Modi's leadership? How important is a PLI scheme as an incentive to manufacturing companies in achieving Atmanirbhar? What does the annual survey of industries and trade data suggest?
India's approach to Atmanirbhar is, first of all, not about self-reliance or going backwards inward, but it is about producing in India for the world and ensuring that supply chain disruptions don't affect India, and we achieve a certain measure of reliance on domestic production for key components and products in the country. So Atmanirbhar is not about becoming insular, but about becoming self-reliant and also becoming a reliable supplier for the rest of the world. Now, one of the important ingredients of China's economic transformation, among many other things, was its ability to create global capacity and scale in different sectors, so much so that the world became dependent on the Chinese sources of supply. Now, India, obviously, for example, used to be able to make what is called API, active pharmaceutical ingredients, but they have now completely sort of become dependent on China for that, even though we are global leaders in generic drugs. So we need to recapture that. So without the APIs, you can't make pharmaceuticals. So the Prime Minister's vision of Atmanirbhar, which is manifested in the production-linked incentive schemes announced in 15 sectors, including more recently drones and components, etc., is all about creating capacity in multiple industries, which are of importance both for current economic needs and also for future economic growth prospects. So the range of industries is from semiconductors to electronics manufacturing to IT hardware to white goods to automobile and auto components, telecom, networking products, high efficiency solar photovoltaic modules, medical devices, pharmaceutical drugs, pharma APIs, food products, specialty, steel, etc. So you can see that it covers a very wide spectrum of industries and sectors. And that is why I think this is very important that it enables India to raise its manufacturing share of GDP in the years ahead and also positions India as a global leader. It also will dispel the prevailing notion that India has prematurely deindustrialized. That is not true. India, if anything, hadn't industrialized adequately enough, and this will rectify that imbalance. Now, how does it get reflected in the annual survey of industries? As you know, the annual survey of industries comes with a 2-year lag. So right now, the reflection of this in the annual production, in the export numbers, since many of the PLI schemes have been announced in the course of 2020 and 21, they are at different stages of implementation. Almost many of them are just now making the required capital expenditure to be able to meet the production targets that they have committed to under the PLI. So these are early days to see them reflected in the industrial production, in our job creation, etc., and also in the trade data. However, even before these PLI schemes have started delivering in terms of increased production, the export performance of financial year 2021-22 has shown that India's export growth was a very strong performer. Overall merchandise exports were around $420 billion, a historical high. And one of the top contributors is manufactured goods and engineering goods, including electronic manufacturing, etc. So clearly, that trade data for 21-22 gives us a window into what lies ahead, what is the potential that can be achieved when these PLI schemes start commencing production and exporting, etc. So in that sense, the trade data for 21-22, although it doesn't reflect PLI, because the PLI schemes are yet to deliver on production, maybe except in mobile phones and some electronic components, etc., it's a harbinger of things to come.
Well, it's a very interesting response that you have given. It appears that the industries it covers is consumer electronics and durables when it comes to manufacturing. What about when it comes to agro-processing and similar industries where it also appears to cover food security?
Oh yeah, India has clearly achieved food security because its dependence on imported food grains in the 1960s that paved the way for the Green Revolution, which enabled India to achieve food sufficiency. But now the food self-sufficiency has gone beyond that, and we exported agricultural products to the extent of $50 billion in 21-22. Of course, in the near term, because of the advent of war, India had to turn a bit cautious in terms of harnessing the global markets for India's farm products. So we have temporarily placed some restrictions on wheat exports. Even then, government-to-government exports are still happening. And we also placed some short-term restrictions on sugar exports. But nonetheless, India has been food grain exporter for the last several years. And that will only grow once the current concerns with ensuring adequate buffer stocks is addressed fully. So food security is something that the government has achieved both in terms of production and in terms of distribution. Where the distribution has been achieved is to plug the loopholes and leakages in India's public distribution system, where almost 40 to 50% of the food allocation done through public distribution used to leak out. And that is where I think the Prime Minister's vision, Modi ji's vision of implementing the Jan Dhan Yojana, Aadhaar and mobile phones. So the JAM Trinity has played a big role in ensuring that both food and cash transfers to the Indian public reaches the ultimate beneficiary without leakage along the way. And that is how food security, not just at the farm level, but also at the level of the households, at the level of kitchens, has been achieved by the government. Through incentivizing farm production, through ensuring that the minimum support prices are at least 50% above the cost of cultivation, and delivering and providing crop insurance schemes, soil assessment cards, Kisan credit card, and also cash support to farmers. These are all the ways in which farmers are made to feel secure and they can take the risk in planting new crops, etc. But also in ensuring that whatever is produced ultimately works towards fulfilling the nutrition and hunger needs of Indians. That has been taken care of, improving the channel, in improving the distribution mechanism through the use of technology and Aadhaar, Jan Dhan Yojana, through the banking system and through use of mobile phones, being able to target beneficiaries. So that is how India's food security has been addressed by Prime Minister Modi's government.
Dr. Nageswaran, from food security, my next question would be on health security. A specific mention to the chapter in the book, Thinking Big and Executing in Scale, has been the pharmaceutical exports that are a direct beneficiary of this economic policy. How did we go about achieving this? You mentioned the PLI scheme in some detail.
Indian pharma companies have been one of the leading success stories in terms of generic drug manufacturing. And in general, enabled by their price competitiveness and good quality, they have already taken a good market share in the global market space, with 60% of world's vaccines and 20% of generic medicines coming from India. And in general, India ranks third worldwide for production by volume and 14th by value in terms of pharma products. And behind this success story is the manufacturing excellence, robust infrastructure, cost competitiveness, trained human capital and innovation. And the current market size is around $50 billion. In fact, the pharma and electronic manufacturing exports have been India's success stories even before the PLI schemes have been announced. The share of pharmaceutical drugs and medicines in our global exports is around 6%. And formulations and biologicals actually account for 73.3% of our overall pharma exports, followed by bulk drugs and drug intermediates, etc. And therefore, I think what has happened is that in the pharma sector, the 55% of our pharma exports actually go towards highly regulated markets in the US and European Union, which means we have to up our production, we have to up our quality and inspection and processes, etc. And the government has enabled that through its various incentive and taxation policies and enabled the pharma companies to improve their game and to be able to export to highly regulated markets in Europe and across the Atlantic as well. This has been achieved despite, lockdowns in the last 2 years and global supply chain disruptions, etc. And more important signature success story, of course, has been the development of vaccines for COVID, both by Serum Institute and also the Covaxin. So both indigenously developed, of course, in the case of Covishield, it is a process that came to us from AstraZeneca in the US, but Covaxin is an indigenously developed vaccine. And India's research institutions like ICMR and National Institute of Virology have actually contributed to this development of Indian vaccines at a very short time. And unlike in the case of some other countries whose vaccines had questionable efficacy, India's vaccines have proven not just in outside the country, but more importantly in the world's most important market, which is India itself. Because to be able to vaccinate a population of around 100 crores, and about 80% of them with having more than 2 doses, and India's ongoing ability to open up the economy and ensure that economic growth and job creation happens, is because the vaccination program has been successful and the vaccines have been efficacious. In that sense, what the government and the private sector have achieved in collaboration through the government's medical research institutions and virology institutions, etc., is something very commendable.
Dr. Nageswaran, we're also seeing a great deal of convergence in order to meet the COVID crisis. What we have seen is that information gathering and facilitation on the web portal for vaccination registration during the COVID crisis, called CoWIN, was a very effective tool to meet the demands of the people looking to seek a government action. Now, how important has digitization been in the timely dispensation of the life-saving vaccines been in combating the pandemic?
Digitization, there is no question, has played a very big role because the CoWIN platform, it is a global best practice that has been developed in this country. Other countries are making use of this CoWIN app for their own vaccination program. And in fact, beyond the COVID vaccine, it can be used for overall health records maintenance, etc. And recently we have had a Ministry of Health and Family Welfare release a report titled COVID-19, India's Vaccine Development Story and Vaccine Administration Journey. And it has been prepared by the Institute for Competitiveness, which is part of the global network of the Institute for Strategy and Competitiveness and affiliated to Harvard Business School. That report highlights the critical aspects contributing to India's success in vaccination and also in vaccine development, including the manufacturing of indigenous vaccines. More importantly, the information and experiences that India has been able to gather is going to serve as very, very vital learning for future pandemic management. This document also studies the quality of the vaccination sessions, the information provided to the public, the cold chain infrastructure and logistics that has been created to be able to transport this vaccine from their places of manufacture to the rest of the country, real-time monitoring and feedback through control rooms, etc. All these things have been facilitated by the digital progress that India has made over the last 5 to 6 years. And in a sense, the combination of medical research, India's established track record in vaccine development, in combination with the digital technology, have combined to produce a success story both in the vaccine development and also in its administration, which is now serving as a template and model for the rest of the world to learn from, and also to enable India to use this learning for future pandemics. Hopefully they don't occur. But if they occur, India, I think, is better prepared, and that is a confident statement one can make.
Dr. Nageswaran, without a strong fiscal strategy, it's not possible for any government to carry out social spending to such a great scale. Just coming back to taxation now, GST collections are at a record high. How important has, once again, digitization been in the payment of products and services for the consumers in India? and under the National Payments Corporation of India has deployed the BHIM UPI, the Unified Payments Interface, and the RuPay cards.
Digitization is going to add at least 50 basis points or 0.5% to India's potential growth in the years to come. And if you look at the value of the UPI transactions through the Unified Payment Interface, which is more than $1 trillion in the previous financial year, 21-22. And it definitely has played a big part, not only in financial inclusion, but also in, as you mentioned earlier, in India's fiscal planning and fiscal resources mobilization. Because technology and the information gathering through aggregating information from various sources, whether it is through mobile phones, through digital transactions, etc., the government is able to come up with a full picture of what each and every individual in the country is spending and whether they are proportionate to their income and wealth that are being declared, etc., and being able to mobilize tax resources that can be then used both for economic development and for welfare spending. The other way in which this information is being harnessed and enabled through digital interventions is in enabling a taxpayer-friendly administration. India is able to now today talk about faceless assessment, being able to allow tax assessees to go back and rectify their tax returns over a period of 2 years is because of the confidence we now have. Government is in a position to verify the authenticity and the reliability and the accuracy of the information that is being provided under the revised tax return. So because of the confidence that India has in its ability to harness information for tax administration, it is also enabling the Indian government to make the tax administration user-friendly.
You mentioned about aggregating information. How important has the Jan Dhan Yojana and the Aadhaar Card Trinity Jam been for the general public?
If you look at Jan Dhan Yojana, financial inclusion has resulted in, growing cash balances in the bank accounts. And now the average cash balance is somewhere around 3,000 to 4,000 rupees in PM Jan Dhan Yojana accounts. And that also creates a culture of savings. And if you look at the Jam Trinity's role in the pandemic years in 2020 and 21, they have played a very big role in enabling the government to transfer benefits to poorer and rural and low-income segments of the population such that they didn't have to go without food, such that they had access to health care, and such that they didn't have to resort to loans to be able to sustain themselves during a period when economic activity was disrupted. And you can also see this impact in the Direct Benefit Transfer Mission, DBT Bharat, the website. The amount of transfers made by the government in cash and in kind through crores of beneficiaries has been facilitated by the Jam Trinity. And you had an independent assessment done by KPMG at the behest of KFW Bank, which had provided loans to India during the COVID times to make welfare transfers. They have documented that these welfare transfers have actually prevented households having to take recourse to borrowing, having to cut back on their consumption needs. And then the Prime Minister's Ayushman Bharat scheme, in a study done by the Indian School of Business, has shown that health expenditure outlays by households, they didn't have to cut back. So it caused a decline in the health expenditure by households by about 21%. Out-of-pocket expenses, because there was a coverage from the Ayushman Bharat. Now, all of this would not have been enabled but for the information available with the government through the Jam Trinity that makes sure that the schemes are targeted at the right segments of the population without its leakage going towards undeserving beneficiaries, so that the amount of money available is deployed effectively in reaching those who need them the most.
Well, taking a cue from that, with individuals being a beneficiary, let's look at how businesses have been a beneficiary of the economic policy. What has been the contribution of the government EMarketplace and its app Sahay in reforming public procurement and business credit?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you look at the government's e-procurement program, the economic survey of 21-22 had a very interesting discussion on the contribution made by the government's e-procurement program. First of all, it has made the process transparent. It has saved lots of money for the government. Nearly the gross merchandise value through the government's e-marketplace has grown by 84.5% since 2019 to 21-22, average annual growth rate of 84.5%. So you can imagine the expansion in the value of the merchandise that is available on the government's GEM platform. And several independent studies done by the World Bank, and as I mentioned in our own economic survey 21-22, they all indicated substantial savings to the government because of the ability of the e-procurement market of the government to pool in more participation and provide cost-effective options. So compared to even online platforms like Amazon, Flipkart, GEM prices were about 9.5% lower. And more importantly, they also provided MSMEs an opportunity to generate business, and the Sahay application provides opportunity for them to grow their business because now they can be enabled to take credit because they now have a valid license and they have a credit trail, and it is easy for credit disbursing agencies like banks, non-banks and financial institutions to assess their income coming from their participation in the e-marketplace and be able to accordingly provide financial support and through loans and credit to these small enterprises. Earlier, and now that becomes a virtuous circle. The moment you have credit, you can also expand production and deliver greater number of products and also in larger volumes to the e-marketplace and also to other businesses outside. So in a way, MSMEs could now expand their business because of their participation in the e-marketplace and the financial access that it opens up through the Sahay app as well. So once they have established a track record, then they can accept large orders and also get loans to fulfill these orders based on the collateral and the protection offered by these large orders that they have received.
Dr. Nageswaran, in the insolvency and the bankruptcy code and the institutions formed under the statute has played a key role in addressing concerns related to debt clearing and NPAs. You mentioned about MSMEs. What are the reforms being carried out to deal with the challenges before the banking system to prevent bad debts developing in the future?
The important reforms that banks have gone through in the last several years is coming from most of the initiatives taken by the Reserve Bank of India. The government on its part has done a few things. It has enabled the merger of banks such that they can take advantage of their technology platforms, the scale efficiency achieved in the merger and the marriage of technology platforms, in the pooling of personnel between different institutions, and the saving on overheads and establishment costs as well. The government has recapitalized financial institutions such that they can lend more. The government has also enabled them through the creation of the Bank Boards Bureau to acquire talent and skill and experience at senior management levels. The most important contributions that the government has made to the banking system is the promulgation and the enactment of the insolvency and bankruptcy protection. And that is what has given, and because of the theme of India's insolvency and bankruptcy protection legislation being creditor in control, Indian creditors, especially the banks that had no recourse to recovering failed loans, now have a process. But it also has made that several loans that would have turned bad and problematic earlier don't end up being bad loans right now, because the promoters know that if they do create a default situation, then they have the possibility of losing their business entirely, losing control and ownership, etc. So that is the biggest contribution that Modi ji's government has made to the banking system in enacting the insolvency and bankruptcy code. And of course, the central bank also has taken several steps that have improved the risk assessment culture, risk assessment capabilities in the banking system, and hopefully the lessons of previous crises. I hope the learnings also will help prevent the banking system from going through one more experience of that nature.
Dr. Nageswaran, the chapter in your book is titled Thinking Big and Executing in Scale, and I'm sure the next question would capture that very well. Startups have become unicorns with a valuation of $1 billion on listing at the stock exchanges. Now, how has the startup policy encouraged these investment sizes?
India's startup policy has been evolving very, very steadily in the right direction. It has enabled the creation of many incubators. It has provided for tax exemptions. It has provided for credit access. It has provided for reporting requirements being eased for them, etc. And also in assessing their valuations and being able to allow stock options and grants to employees such that they develop a stake in the new company. All these have been facilitated through tweaks and amendments to tax laws. And the government has also created the National Infrastructure Investment Fund, and there are SIDBI has an MSME fund as well. And many academic institutions around the country have been encouraged to set up incubators which mentor as well as provide initial seed funding to startup enterprises. So India's startup ecosystem is not confined to the big metros, but it has spread to B and C tier towns and cities as well. And that is the biggest contribution that the government's emphasis on Startup India and Stand Up India has made to creating not just unicorns, but creating a culture of entrepreneurship, creating the ecosystem for entrepreneurship and startup, once again, not among the big cities, but across the country.
Dr. Nageswaran, my last question is, what are the future economic prospects of India inviting further foreign direct investment so that India is able to achieve its $5 trillion goal and more currently contain inflation?
India's track record in attracting foreign direct investment in the last 8 years since Prime Minister Modi ji came to office in 2014 has been remarkably different and better than the previous years and previous decades. As a percentage of GDP or in absolute dollar amounts, the foreign direct investment inflows, even after accounting for Indians investing overseas, the number has significant jump and then a steady progress since 2014. And that is partly due to the attention paid over the last several years on improving India's business conditions, operating conditions through tax reforms, through tax cuts, through decriminalizing Companies Act provisions, etc. All of them have contributed to instilling a sense of confidence among foreign investors on India's growth prospects going forward. And therefore, given India's reliability, India's sanctity of contracts, and India's judicial system, which rule objectively rather than based on nationalistic considerations, are also important in giving the investors a certain sense of confidence about their ability to earn returns and also enjoy those returns in their home currency as well when they repatriate profits back to their places of origin. Today, we have an inflation rate of around 7% as per Consumer Price Index statistics. But in the medium to long run, the government's focus, especially under Prime Minister Modi, on creating physical infrastructure, on creating digital infrastructure, on enabling business conditions to become easier and simpler. These are all the ways in which, and most importantly, the production-linked incentive scheme that creates global capacity and scale. These are all the things that are going to help India's inflation rate to come down to much more reasonable levels, around 4 to 5% in the medium term.
Dr. Nageswaran, do give us your thoughts on the compilation of this book, Modi at 20, Dreams Meet Reality. You already have a contribution to a chapter in the book, Thinking Big and Executing in Scale.
It was a privilege and honor to be chosen to contribute to this volume, which has contributions from many distinguished personalities from around the world. And each one of them is celebrity and an important figure in their respective or leader in their respective fields. And to be able to contribute a chapter along with them is a privilege. And also it's an even bigger and greater privilege to write about the Honorable Prime Minister, given his extremely distinguished track record. It's important for the future generations to know about it in greater detail. So a documentation of this nature is important.
Well, it is a special honor and privilege, Dr. Nageswaran, to have you on this special program on All India Radio, where we have discussed in some great detail about this specific chapter, which I'm sure our listeners would enjoy hearing very much. Thank you so much for being with us on this special program.
Thank you very much.
You were listening to an exclusive interview with the Chief Economic Advisor, Dr. V. Anantha Nageswaran. The interviewer was Arjun J. Chaudhary, AIR correspondent. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel, News on AIR Official. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.